The heavy velvet of the wedding veil made it hard to breathe. It smelled of lavender and old cedar, a scent meant to mask the fear of the woman wearing it. But Rena wasn't just afraid, she was terrified. She stood in the center of her stepfather's study, her hands trembling beneath the long, embroidered sleeves of a gown that didn't belong to her, a gown that cost more than her life was worth. "Stop shaking," Lady Selene hissed, her fingers digging into Rena's shoulder with a cruelty that bruised. "You will ruin the silk." Rena swallowed hard, tasting bile. "He will know," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "The moment he lifts this veil, Alpha Vorian will know I am not Lila. He will kill me." "He won't kill you," her stepfather Alpha Kale said from his desk. He didn't look up. He was busy signing the trade agreement that this marriage was buying. Vorian is a barbarian from the Iron Peaks. He doesn't care about beauty or bloodlines. He cares about the dowry. He wants the grain shipments and the southern access. You are a body to warm his bed and a signature on a contract. Nothing more. Rena wanted to scream. She wanted to tear the suffocating lace from her face and run into the woods, to take her chances as a rogue wolf. But she couldn't. Not when they had her younger brother Toby locked in the cellar. "If you speak," Lady Selene whispered, leaning close enough that her perfume clogged Rena's nose. "If you make a sound, if you give him even a hint that you are not the true daughter of the Silver River Pack, Toby dies. Do you understand?" Rena nodded, a single tear tracing a hot path down her cheek beneath the veil. "I understand." This was how fairy tales usually ended, with a wedding. But for Rena, this was how the nightmare began. She was being sent to the Iron Peaks to marry the Mad King of the Mountains, a man rumor said had teeth like obsidian and a heart made of glacial ice, a man who supposedly tore the throats out of his enemies with his bare hands. And she was being sent in place of Lila, her beautiful, spoiled stepsister, who was currently sobbing in her bedroom because she refused to marry a monster. The carriage ride felt like a funeral procession. The further north they traveled, the colder the air became. The lush green forests of the Silver River territory gave way to jagged pines and imposing gray rock. Snow began to fall, dusting the carriage roof, a stark white warning. Rena sat alone inside. They hadn't sent a maid with her. Why waste a servant on a lamb being led to slaughter? She hugged her arms around her chest, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. The dress was thin, designed for the temperate south, not the brutal winds of the Iron Peaks. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, numbing her fingers. Or perhaps that wasn't the cold. Perhaps that was just the dread. She remembered the stories the elders told around the fire. They said the wolves of the Iron Peaks were giants, that they didn't shift like normal wolves. They turned into shadows and smoke. They said Alpha Vorian was the worst of them all, that he had conquered 5 territories in 5 years because he possessed a power no shifter should have, and in 1 hour, she would be his wife. The carriage jolted to a halt. Rena's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She heard the heavy thud of boots on frozen earth, rough voices, the neighing of horses that smelled a predator nearby. The door swung open. A blast of freezing wind hit her first, followed by a voice that sounded like gravel grinding together. "Out!" Rena gathered her skirts, her fingers stiff. She stepped down from the carriage and gasped. She had expected a fortress. She hadn't expected a city carved directly into the mountain itself. Massive stone spires pierced the gray sky, connected by iron bridges that spanned dizzying drops. Torches burned with blue flames, casting long, dancing shadows against the rock. And standing before her was an army. Hundreds of them. Warriors clad in dark fur and black iron armor, their faces hard, their eyes tracking her every movement. There was no softness here, no flowers, no music, no celebration. This wasn't a wedding, it was a transaction. "This way," the guard grunted. He didn't offer her a hand. Rena kept her head down, the veil obscuring her vision, turning the world into a haze of white lace. She walked blindly, following the heavy tread of the guard's boots. The snow crunched beneath her satin slippers, soaking them instantly. Her feet were freezing, but she forced herself to walk with the dignity her mother had taught her before she died. "You are Rena of the Silver River," she told herself. "You are strong. You survive." They led her into a great hall that smelled of pine smoke, roasted meat, and wet fur. It was warmer here, but the atmosphere was suffocating. She could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on her, assessing, judging. "The bride," a herald announced, though he sounded bored. "Lila of the Silver River." Rena flinched at the name. It felt like a curse. "Bring her forward." The voice came from the dais at the far end of the hall. It wasn't a shout, but it carried effortlessly over the murmuring crowd. It was deep, resonant, and calm, dangerously calm. Rena forced her legs to move. 1 step, 2. The silence in the hall was deafening. She felt small, insignificant, a fraud wrapped in silk. As she approached the dais, she saw him. He sat on a throne carved from black stone and lined with the pelts of white wolves. He didn't lounge. He sat with the stillness of a predator waiting to strike. He was massive. Even seated, his shoulders were broad enough to block out the firelight behind him. His hair was dark, falling in loose waves around a face that was harsh, angular, and devastatingly handsome. But it was his eyes that stopped Rena's breath in her throat. They weren't brown or blue. They were gold, molten, burning gold, with vertical pupils that narrowed as she approached. Alpha Vorian, the Mad King. He stood up, and the room seemed to shrink. He towered over everyone, radiating a power that made the fine hairs on Rena's arms stand up. It was an alpha command, a physical weight in the air that demanded submission. Rena fought the urge to kneel. She kept her chin high, even though her knees were knocking together. Vorian descended the steps of the dais, moving with a fluid grace that belied his size. He stopped in front of her. He was so close she could smell him. Not the wet dog smell of the others, but something crisp and clean. Like ozone before a lightning strike, like deep winter snow. It was the most intoxicating scent she had ever encountered. Her wolf, usually dormant and beaten down by years of mistreatment, suddenly stirred in her chest. It scratched at her ribs, whining. "Him," it whispered. "Him." Rena pushed the feeling down. Fear. It had to be fear. "So," Vorian said softly, "this is the jewel of the South." He circled her slowly. Rena held her breath. He was inspecting her like a horse at an auction. "You are shaking," he observed, stopping behind her. His voice vibrated against her spine. "It is cold, my lord," Rena whispered, remembering Lady Seleni's instructions to keep her voice light and airy like Lila's. But her voice came out husky, trembling. "Is it?" Vorian moved back to face her. "Or are you afraid?" Rena trailed off. "I am respectful of your power, Alpha." Vorian let out a low sound, almost a laugh, but devoid of humor. "Respect? A pretty word for terror." He reached out. His hand was large, scarred, his fingers rough. Rena flinched as he touched the edge of her veil. "Pack law dictates I must see the face of my mate before the vows are spoken," he said. This was it, the moment of death. He would lift the veil. He would see she wasn't the blonde, blue-eyed Lila he had been promised. He would see Rena, with her unruly dark curls, her strange violet eyes, and the scar on her chin from when her stepbrother had pushed her down the stairs. He would know he'd been cheated, and he would kill her. "I'm sorry, Toby," she thought, closing her eyes. Vorian gripped the lace. With a swift motion, he threw it back. The cool air of the hall hit her flushed face. Rena kept her eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the shout of rage, waiting for the blow. Silence stretched. Thick, heavy silence. "Open your eyes," Vorian commanded. Rena obeyed. She looked up, way up, into those burning gold eyes. Vorian wasn't looking at the crowd. He wasn't looking at her dress. He was looking at her face with an intensity that made her feel like her skin was on fire. His gaze traced the curve of her jaw, the line of her throat, the scar on her chin. He didn't look angry. He looked stunned. His pupils dilated until the gold was almost swallowed by black. His chest heaved, a sudden, sharp intake of breath. "You," he breathed. It wasn't a question. It was a recognition. Rena blinked, confused. "My lord?" Vorian turned sharply to the crowd, his cape swirling around him. "The ceremony. Begin it. Now." The pack elder scrambled forward, looking terrified. Yes, Alpha." Rena's mind was reeling. He hadn't noticed. How could he not notice? Lila was famous for her beauty. Rena was the invisible stepsister. Was he blind? Or did he simply not care who he married as long as the contract was signed? The elder began the rites, speaking in the old tongue of the mountains. Rena didn't understand the words, but she felt the magic in them. It was heavier here than in the south. Ancient, binding. Your hand, Vorian demanded, holding his out. Rena placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, calloused, and shockingly gentle. As soon as their skin touched, a jolt of electricity shot up her arm, so powerful she gasped. Vorian felt it too. His hand tightened around hers, possessive. He pulled her a step closer, invading her personal space until the toes of her satin shoes touched his heavy boots. Do you, the elder stammered, switching to the common tongue. Lila of the Silver River, accept— Stop, Vorian growled. The hall went dead silent. The elder dropped his ceremonial bowl. Rena's blood turned to ice. Here it comes, she thought. He realized. Vorian ignored the elder. He ignored the hundreds of warriors watching. He turned his body so he was blocking Rena from their view, creating a private world just for the two of them. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. What is your name? Rena's heart stopped. My name? Your true name, he whispered. Don't lie to me, little wolf. I will know. She looked into his eyes and saw no mercy there, but she saw something else. Desperation. Rena, she whispered, her voice shaking. My name is Rena. Vorian exhaled, a long, shuddering sound. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a smile of triumph, of a dragon who had just found a hoard of gold. Rena, he tested the name, rolling it over his tongue. Rena, he turned back to the elder. Her name, Vorian announced, his voice booming like thunder against the stone walls, is Rena. Correct the vows. Gasps rippled through the hall. But Alpha, the elder squeaked. The contract. The Silver River Alpha promised his daughter Lila. If this is not her, the treaty is void. This is an act of war. Let them try, Vorian snarled. His eyes flashed, and for a second, his human face rippled, the beast beneath fighting to surface. Let them try to take her back. He looked down at Rena, his gaze scorching. I don't want the treaty. I don't want the grain. I don't want the other sister. He lifted Rena's hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that seared her skin. I want her. The ceremony that followed was a blur. Rena moved through it like a sleepwalker. She couldn't understand what was happening. Why wasn't he angry? Why was he holding her hand as if she were made of fragile glass? When the final words were spoken, Vorian didn't wait for the elder to tell him to kiss the bride. He cupped Rena's face in his large hands. Mine, he murmured against her lips, and then he kissed her. It wasn't the chaste, polite kiss of a political arrangement. It was hungry. It was claiming. His lips were hot and firm, moving against hers with a skill that made her knees weak. Rena had never been kissed before, but her body seemed to know exactly what to do. She melted into him, her hands instinctively clutching the fur of his cloak to keep from falling. The bond snapped into place. It was like a physical blow to the chest, a golden tether forged between their souls, bright and unbreakable. She felt his emotions crash into her mind. Relief, triumph, and a fierce, overwhelming protectiveness. Mate, her wolf howled. Mate. Vorian pulled back, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. Finally, he whispered. He swept her up into his arms, bridal style, as if she weighed nothing. The feast! The elder shouted, trying to salvage the proceedings. Send the food to my chambers, Vorian commanded over his shoulder, carrying Rena toward the back of the hall. We are retiring. The warriors cheered, banging their fists on the tables, a rhythmic primal sound. Rena hid her burning face in Vorian's neck. She smelled the wood smoke and ozone again, stronger now. He carried her up a winding stone staircase, past guards who bowed low as they passed. He didn't stop until they reached a set of massive double doors carved with howling wolves. He kicked them open and carried her inside. The room was enormous. A fire roared in a fireplace big enough to stand in. The floor was covered in thick furs. A massive four-poster bed dominated the center of the room. Vorian kicked the door shut behind them and locked it. He walked to the bed and set her down gently on the edge. But he didn't step away. He stood between her knees, his hands resting on her thighs, trapping her. Now, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble. Tell me why you thought I would kill you. Rena trembled. The adrenaline of the ceremony was fading, leaving her exhausted and confused. I'm not Lila. I'm the stepdaughter. The mistake. They forced me to come because Lila refused. I thought, when you saw I wasn't her, you thought I wanted the spoiled brat with the painted face? Vorian scoffed. I met Lila once, at the gathering of the packs 3 years ago. She shrieked because she got mud on her shoe. He leaned closer, brushing a stray curl from Rena's forehead. But I saw you too, Rena. You were in the kitchens. You were bandaging the leg of a horse that the stable master had whipped. You yelled at a man twice your size to leave the animal alone. Rena's eyes widened. She remembered that. It was the day she realized just how cruel her stepfather's men could be. You saw that? I saw everything, Vorian said. I saw a woman with fire in her blood and steel in her spine. I saw a woman who protected the weak even when she was powerless. His thumb traced her bottom lip. I went to your stepfather the next day. I offered the treaty. I offered the dowry. But I didn't ask for Lila. I asked for you. Rena's mouth fell open. But the contract, it said the Alpha's daughter. Political wording, Vorian growled. Your stepfather is a snake. He knew who I meant. But he assumed he could trick me. He assumed I was just a savage from the north who wouldn't know the difference between a diamond and a piece of glass. He laughed darkly. He sent Lila's name in the letters. He tried to hide you. But I have spies, Rena. I knew the moment they put you in that carriage. I knew you were coming to me. He knelt before her, looking up into her face with an expression akin to worship. I have waited 3 years to get you out of that house. I have waited 3 years to make you mine. Rena felt tears prick her eyes. For her whole life, she had been the extra, the burden, the unwanted thing. And here was the most powerful alpha in the kingdom, kneeling at her feet, telling her he had schemed a war just to get to her. Why? She whispered. Why me? Vorian's eyes glowed gold. Because, little wolf, from the moment I saw you fighting for that horse, my soul knew what you were. He took her hand and placed it over his heart. She could feel it beating, heavy and rhythmic, echoing the beat of her own. You are my mate, he said, and if they had sent Lila, I would have burned their kingdom to the ground and come for you myself. Rena stared at him, the truth of his words vibrating through the bond. He meant it. He would have started a war for her. But my brother, she said suddenly, panic gripping her again. Toby. They have him. Lady Celine said if I revealed myself, they would kill him. Vorian's face changed instantly. The softness vanished, replaced by the terrifying mask of the Iron King. He stood up, towering over her again. They threatened a pup. He's only 7, Rena sobbed. They have him in the cellar. Vorian walked to the window and threw it open. The cold wind rushed in, swirling the snow into the room. He let out a howl, a sound so loud, so full of rage and command that it shook the stones of the castle. Within seconds, an answering howl ripped through the night from the courtyard below. Then another, and another. The sound of 1,000 wolves answering their king. Vorian turned back to her. His smile was gone. In its place was a look of cold, calculated violence. My beta is already moving south, he said. He has orders to retrieve your brother. And Rena? Yes. He has orders to bring me the head of anyone who tries to stop him. Vorian walked back to the bed and leaned over her, caging her in. You are safe now. Your brother will be safe, and your stepfather and that witch of a wife. He kissed her forehead, a gentle touch that contrasted with the violence in his voice. They just made a very, very big mistake. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers when Rena finally woke. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The bed was too soft, the furs too thick, the silence too absolute. In her stepfather's house, mornings were filled with the shrieking of servants and the heavy, ominous tread of Alpha Kale's boots. Here, there was only the sound of wind howling outside the thick stone walls. Rena sat up, her heart giving a frantic kick when she realized the other side of the bed was empty. Vorian was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her chest. Had it been a dream? The kindness, the claiming, the promise to save Toby? Had he left to change his mind? Breathe, little wolf. The deep voice came from the shadows near the balcony. Vorian was there, seated in a high-backed chair, watching her. He hadn't left. He had been guarding her sleep. He stood and walked into the pale morning light. He had discarded his heavy fur cloak and armor, wearing only a loose linen shirt and dark trousers. He looked less like a king and more like a man, though a man built to move mountains. He held out a steaming mug. Drink. It is herbal tea with honey. Good for the shock. Rena took the mug, her fingers brushing his. The mate bond hummed at the contact, a low, steady vibration that settled her nerves instantly. You stayed, she whispered. Where else would I be? Vorian sat on the edge of the bed, his weight making the mattress dip. My beta Harlan sent word via Falcon at dawn. He has crossed the border into the Silver River territory. He will have your brother by nightfall. Rena clutched the mug tighter. My stepfather, he has guards. Witches. Harlan has a legion of Iron Peak warriors, Vorian said, his voice flat with absolute confidence. And he knows that if he fails to bring the boy back unharmed, he answers to me. Do not waste your energy on fear, Rena. You will need it for today. Today? Rena asked. What happens today? Vorian's golden eyes gleamed. Today you stop being the invisible stepdaughter. Today the Iron Peaks meets its queen. Rena expected to be terrified walking through the fortress. She expected to see dungeons and torture chambers, fitting for the barbarians the southern packs whispered about. Instead, she saw a kingdom that had learned to survive the impossible. Vorian walked beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back as they navigated the wide stone corridors. The castle was carved directly into the living rock of the mountain. It was stark, yes, but beautiful. Sunlight filtered through high, narrow windows, illuminating tapestries depicting great hunts and ancient battles. But it was the people who surprised her most. They passed a training yard where warriors sparred with brutal efficiency. But when they saw Vorian, they didn't cower in fear like her stepfather's men. They slammed their fists over their hearts, bowing with deep, genuine respect. My lord! My lady! A young girl, no older than 10, ran out from the kitchens, carrying a basket of bread. She stopped skidding in front of them, eyes wide. Most Southern alphas would have kicked a servant for approaching without permission. Vorian stopped. He knelt down, bringing himself to the child's eye level. Easy, Mara. Did you steal that bread? The girl giggled. The cook gave it to me. For the queen? She thrust a warm, crusty loaf toward Rena. Rena stared at the child, then at the bread. In her old life, she had been the one serving, the one ducking her head to avoid a backhand. She didn't know how to be the one receiving the gift. She slowly reached out and took the bread. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick. It smells delicious. The girl beamed and ran off. Vorian stood, watching Rena with an unreadable expression. You are surprised, he noted. I was told... Rena hesitated. I was told you were monsters, that you ate children and burned villages for sport. We are predators, Vorian admitted, guiding her toward the battlements. We are harsh because the mountain demands it. If you are weak here, the cold takes you. If you are slow, the rock slides take you. But we do not prey on the weak, Rena. We protect them. That is the difference between a king and a tyrant. They stepped out onto the main balcony overlooking the valley. The wind whipped Rena's hair across her face, but she didn't feel the cold. Vorian's arm was around her, his body heat acting as a furnace. Below them, the city sprawled out, stone houses clinging to the cliffs, smoke rising from chimneys, the distant clang of blacksmith hammers. It was a hard life, but a proud one. This is yours now, Vorian said, his voice rumbling against her ear. Every stone, every sword, every wolf, they belong to you. Rena leaned into him, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was home. But peace was a fragile thing. 2 days passed. Rena spent them learning the layout of the fortress, learning the names of the staff who treated her with a reverence she still found jarring. Vorian was never far. He held court in the Great Hall, settling disputes and organizing patrols, but his gaze constantly drifted to wherever she sat. He was courting her. It wasn't with flowers or poetry. It was with glances that burned. It was the way he made sure her plate was always full of the best cuts of meat. It was the way he growled low in his throat whenever another male looked at her for a second too long. But the shadow of the South still loomed. On the third evening, The doors to the great hall banged open. Snow swirled in, followed by a warrior covered in mud and dried blood. It wasn't Harlan, the beta. It was a scout. The music stopped. The chatter died. Vorian was on his feet in an instant, his body tense. "Report!" he barked. The scout fell to one knee, gasping for breath. "Ambush, Alpha! At the crossing of the White River! Sorcery!" Rena dropped her goblet. It clattered loudly against the stone floor, wine spilling like blood. "Toby!" she whispered. Vorian was beside her before she could collapse, his arm supporting her weight. "Speak clearly!" he commanded the scout, his voice ice cold. "Where is my beta? Where is the boy?" "Lady Celine," the scout choked out. "She knew we were coming. She hired a coven of shadowbinders. They trapped Harlan and the unit in an illusion spell near the border. We cannot find them. They are lost in the mist." Rena felt the room spin. Shadowbinders. Dark magic that twisted the mind, making you walk in circles until you died of exposure or madness. Toby was 7 years old. He was alone in the dark with monsters. "She knew," Rena gasped, clutching Vorian's tunic. "She knew I would try to save him." Vorian turned to her, and the look on his face terrified her. It wasn't directed at her, but the sheer violence in his eyes turned them from gold to near black. "She did not know," Vorian growled. "She hoped. She set a trap, and my wolves walked into it." He turned back to the hall, raising his voice so it echoed off the rafters. "Prepare the wyverns." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Rena blinked. "Wyverns? We do not just run on paws in the Iron Peaks, Rena," Vorian said, grabbing a heavy fur cloak and draping it over her shoulders. "The mountains are too steep, the valleys too deep. We fly." "You're going?" Rena asked, her voice trembling. "We are going," Vorian corrected. He looked down at her, cupping her face. "That witch thinks she can trap my pack in the mist? She thinks she can keep what belongs to my mate?" He leaned in, his lips brushing her forehead. "I am going to remind the South why they used to fear the dark." The wyvern stables were located at the highest peak of the fortress. The beasts were massive, leathery winged creatures with scales the color of slate and eyes that glowed like embers. They weren't dragons, they were smaller, faster, bred for hunting in the narrow canyons. Rena had never been so terrified in her life. "Up!" Vorian commanded, lifting her effortlessly onto the saddle of the largest beast, a creature named Obsidian. He swung up behind her, his chest pressing against her back, his arms caging her in as he took the reins. "I'm going to fall," Rena squeaked, gripping the saddle horn so hard her knuckles turned white. "I have you," Vorian murmured, his breath hot against her ear. "I will never let you fall." With an ear-splitting shriek, Obsidian launched himself off the cliff edge. Rena screamed, squeezing her eyes shut as her stomach dropped. The wind roared, tearing at her clothes. They plummeted toward the jagged rocks below, faster and faster, until snap. The great wings unfurled, catching the updraft. They soared. Rena slowly opened her eyes. The world stretched out below them, a tapestry of snow and stone and dark forests. The moon was huge and bright, painting everything in silver. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. She felt Vorian's alpha power flowing into her through the bond, calming her fear, replacing it with a wild, primal exhilaration. This was his world, and now it was hers. They flew south, a squadron of 20 wyverns cutting through the night sky like silent arrows. "Can you sense him?" Vorian asked over the wind. "The bond of blood is strong. Can you feel your brother?" Rena closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses. She wasn't an alpha, but she was a shifter, and Toby was her blood. She focused on the memory of him, his messy hair, his small hand in hers, the smell of milk and soap. "Toby!" she called in her mind. "Toby!" Faintly like a candle flickering in a storm, she felt a pull, fear, cold, and a deep, pervasive confusion. "There!" she gasped, pointing toward a valley shrouded in thick, unnatural gray fog. "He's there, in the mist." Vorian signaled the others. The wyverns folded their wings and dived. The mist was cold and smelled of sulfur and rotting flowers. As soon as they landed on the edge of the fog bank, Rena felt the magic trying to claw at her mind. "Turn back," it whispered. "Sleep. Forget." Vorian snarled, a low, guttural sound that cut through the whispers. His alpha aura flared, a golden shield that expanded to cover Rena and his warriors. "Stay close to me," he ordered, drawing a massive broadsword from the sheath on the saddle. "The Shadowbinders will use your memories against you." They entered the mist on foot. The world turned gray. Trees loomed like skeletal fingers. Rena stumbled, her foot catching on a root. Suddenly, she wasn't in the forest anymore. She was back in her stepfather's study. "You are worthless," Alpha Kale's voice sneered from the shadows. "Just like your mother. You couldn't save her, and you can't save the boy." Rena whimpered, covering her ears. "No. He will realize you are nothing." Lady Celine's voice hissed, circling her. "The Mountain King will tire of his plain little toy. And when he discards you, we will be waiting." Rena fell to her knees. The illusion was so real she could smell the polish on Kale's desk. "Rena!" A roar shattered the illusion. Vorian was there, glowing with rage. He wasn't fighting Kale or Celine. He was tearing through black, shadowy figures that darted through the trees. He reached her, hauling her up with one hand. "Look at me," he commanded, shaking her slightly. "It is not real. Look at me." Rena locked eyes with him. The gold burned away the gray fog in her mind. "They said?" "Lies," Vorian growled. "Focus on the boy. Where is he?" Rena gasped, grounding herself in the heat of his grip. She turned, trusting her instincts over her eyes. "This way." She ran, Vorian at her heels. They tore through a thicket of thorns that dissolved into smoke as they passed. And there, in the center of a clearing where the mist was thickest, sat Harlan and 6 other Iron Peak warriors. They were sitting in a circle in the snow, eyes glazed over, staring at nothing. In the center of the circle, curled into a tight ball, was Toby. A woman stood over him. She wore robes of shifting shadow, her face hidden by a hood, a shadowbinder. "You are far from home, King of the Mountains," the witch crooned, her voice sounding like dry leaves. "The boy is mine. The contract demands a life." Vorian didn't pause. He didn't monologue. He didn't negotiate. He moved faster than Rena thought possible. One moment he was beside her. The next he was a blur of motion. The broadsword flashed. The witch shrieked, raising a hand to blast him with magic, but Vorian roared, a sound fueled by the full weight of his alpha authority. The magic shattered against his will like glass. The sword swept down. Silence fell over the clearing. The witch's body turned to ash and smoke before it even hit the ground. The heavy gray mist instantly began to lift, dissipating into the night air. Harlan blinked, shaking his head as if waking from a long dream. He looked up, saw Vorian, and scrambled to his feet. "Alpha, We will discuss it later," Vorian said, sheathing his sword. He turned to Rena, but she was already moving. She dropped to her knees in the snow, pulling the small, shivering boy into her arms. "Toby," she sobbed, rocking him. "Toby, it's me. It's Rena." The boy looked up, his eyes unfocused and terrified. Then recognition dawned. "Rena?" His voice cracked. "Did the bad lady get you too?" "No," Rena said, tears streaming down her face. She looked up at Vorian, who stood watching them, his chest heaving, his eyes soft once more. "No, the king came for us." Toby looked at the giant man looming over them. "Is he a monster?" Toby whispered, echoing the stories they'd been told. Rena smiled, reaching out to take Vorian's hand, pulling him down until he was kneeling in the snow with them. "No, Toby," she said fiercely. "He's not a monster. He's our family." Vorian reached out, his large hand gently covering the top of Toby's head. "Let's go home," he said gruffly. As the Wyverns took flight again, carrying them away from the south and back toward the safety of the peaks, Rena leaned back against Vorian's chest. She watched the Silver River territory fade into the distance. She knew this wasn't over. Her stepfather wouldn't accept this humiliation. Lady Selena wouldn't stop plotting. But as she felt the steady beat of Vorian's heart against her back, Rena realized something. She wasn't the prey anymore. She was the queen of the Iron Peaks. And God help anyone who tried to touch her pack again. The flight back to the Iron Peaks was silent, save for the rhythmic beat of leathery wings against the night air. Rena held Toby close, wrapping him inside her heavy fur cloak until he was nothing but a small lump of warmth against her chest. He had fallen asleep the moment they left the ground, exhausted by fear and the lingering effects of the shadow magic. Vorian sat behind her, one arm tasked with steering the great beast, the other locked around Rena's waist like an iron band. He didn't speak, but she could feel the steady thrum of his rage through their bond. It was a low, simmering heat, directed entirely at the people who had dared to touch what was his. When the fortress finally loomed out of the darkness, lit by thousands of torches that reflected off the snow, Rena felt a strange sensation in her chest. Relief. Not the desperate relief of escaping danger, but the deep, settling relief of returning home. They landed in the courtyard. Before the wyvern had even fully settled, healers were rushing forward. "Take the boy," Vorian commanded, sliding off the saddle and reaching up to help Rena down. "He has been exposed to shadow magic. Check his mind. Check his blood." A kind-faced woman with graying hair stepped forward. "Come, little one," she said gently, lifting Toby from Rena's arms. "Let's get you some hot cocoa." Rena made a move to follow, her maternal instincts screaming to not let him out of her sight, but Vorian caught her hand. "He will be safe, Rena," he said, his voice soft but firm. "My healers are the best in the territories. You need to rest? You are trembling." Rena looked down at her hands. He was right. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her shaking like a leaf in a storm. "I can't rest," she whispered. "My stepfather. Alpha Kale won't stop. He failed to kill Toby, which means he lost his leverage. He'll come for us." "Let him come," Vorian said. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself in her scent. "Let him come, so I can tear him apart." He swept her up into his arms again, carrying her not to the guest quarters, but straight to the royal wing. Servants bowed as they passed, whispering, "The Queen." With newfound awe, they had seen her leave on a wyvern to save a child. She wasn't just a political bride anymore, she was a warrior. Inside the bedroom, the fire had been stoked. A bath was waiting, steam rising in thick, fragrant clouds. "Wash the south off you," Vorian said, setting her down. "I have a war council to convene. I will return." He turned to leave, but Rena caught his sleeve. "Vorian?" He paused, looking back. His golden eyes were dark with unsaid things. "Thank you," she said, "for saving him." Vorian's expression didn't soften, but the bond between them flared with warmth. "He is packed now, Rena, and we protect our own." The War Council room was a cavern of black stone, dominated by a massive table carved from the trunk of an ancient ironwood tree. 12 generals sat around it, men and women who looked like they had been carved from the mountain itself. They were scarred, tough, and fiercely loyal. Rena entered the room an hour later. She had bathed and changed into a dress of heavy midnight blue wool, trimmed with silver fur. It was an iron peak dress. She looked like a queen of winter. The conversation stopped instantly. 12 pairs of predator eyes locked onto her. Vorian sat at the head of the table. He stood immediately when she entered, pulling out the heavy chair to his right. "Sit." Rena sat. She folded her hands on the table to hide their shaking. "We were discussing the retaliation," Harlan, the beta who had been trapped in the mist, said. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp. "Alpha Kale has violated the treaty. Using shadowbinders is a war crime in all territories. We have grounds to invade." "The passes are snowed in," a female general argued. "Moving an army south in deep winter is suicide. We should wait for the thaw." "By the thaw, Kale will have gathered allies," Vorian countered, his voice a low rumble. "He has the grain. He has the trade routes. If we wait, he starves us out." "He won't starve us," Rena said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a bell. Everyone turned to look at her. "My stepfather is greedy," Rena continued, finding her courage. "He relies on the southern trade routes to move his grain, but those routes go through the Whispering Canyon." Vorian looked at her, intrigue sparking in his eyes. "Go on." "The canyon is unstable in winter," Rena explained. "He usually sends scouts to clear the avalanches. But if you were to encourage a few well-placed rock slides, you could cut off his supply lines to the coast. He wouldn't be able to sell his grain. It would rot in his silos." A slow smile spread across Harlan's face. "Economic siege. We starve his coin, not his people." And while he is busy trying to clear the rocks, Rena added, a ruthless glint entering her violet eyes, you take the wyverns. You don't need the ground passes. You can strike his armories from the air. Silence descended on the table. The generals looked at one another, then at Rena, with a newfound respect. She wasn't just a pretty face, she knew her enemy. She has the mind of a strategist, the female general noted approvingly. Vorian leaned back in his chair, looking at Rena with such intense pride it made her blush. She is my mate, he said simply. Did you expect anything less? Later that night, the castle was quiet. Rena sat by the fire in their chambers, watching the flames dance. Toby was safe in the nursery down the hall, guarded by two of Vorian's best warriors. For the first time in years, Rena felt a strange, terrifying emotion. Peace. The door opened, and Vorian entered. He brought the scent of the cold night air with him. He locked the door behind him. A heavy, decisive sound. He walked over to where she sat and sank onto the rug at her feet, resting his head against her knees. It was a submissive gesture, shocking for an alpha of his power. You were brilliant today, he murmured, closing his eyes as Rena instinctively ran her fingers through his dark, wavy hair. I just want him to pay, Rena whispered, for what he did to my mother, for what he did to Toby. He will, Vorian promised. He turned his head, kissing the palm of her hand. But tonight, no more war, no more strategies. He looked up at her, his golden eyes burning with a different kind of hunger. Tonight, I want to know my wife. Rena's breath hitched. They were married. They were fated mates, but they hadn't crossed that final line. Rena hesitated. I don't know how to be a wife, Vorian. I was raised to be a servant. I don't know how to be what you need. Vorian rose to his knees, towering over her even then. He cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. I don't need a queen who knows which fork to use. I don't need a diplomat. I need you. He leaned in, brushing his lips against hers. I need the woman who jumped off a cliff to save her brother. I need the woman who looked a shadowbinder in the eye and didn't blink. That is the only mate I will ever accept. He kissed her then, slow and deep. It wasn't like the kiss in the Great Hall. That had been a claim for the world to see. This was a question, a request. Let me in, his soul whispered to hers through the bond. Rena opened herself to him. The wall she had built around her heart for protection crumbled. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. Vorian groaned, a low, guttural sound, and lifted her from the chair. He carried her to the bed, laying her down against the furs. He moved over her, his weight heavy and grounding. Mine, he growled against her throat. Yours, Rena breathed back. As they came together, the bond flared brighter than the sun. It wasn't just physical pleasure, it was a merging of souls. Rena felt his loneliness, the years he had spent ruling a harsh kingdom alone. And he felt her pain, her isolation, her desperate need to be loved. They healed each other in the dark. And when Rena finally fell asleep, wrapped in his arms, she knew she would never be cold again. The peace lasted exactly 1 week. 7 days of winter walks in the gardens, of meals shared with Toby laughing between them, of nights spent tangled in the sheets. Rena began to forget the fear. She began to believe she was safe, but the past is a persistent hunter. It was mid-morning when the horns blew from the watchtower, not the alarm for an attack, but the signal for visitors. Rena was in the library with Toby, teaching him to read, when Vorian strode in. His face was a mask of stone, his golden eyes hard. Rena, he said, his voice tight, you need to come to the Great Hall. What is it? She asked, standing up, her hand instinctively going to Toby's shoulder. Is it an attack? No, Vorian said. It's a delegation from the Silver River. Rena went cold. My stepfather? No. Alpha Kale wouldn't dare step foot on my mountain after the stunt he pulled with the Shadowbinders. He sent an emissary. Vorian paused, his jaw working. He sent his daughter and your mother. Rena froze. My mother is dead. She died 5 years ago. Apparently, Vorian said grimly, that was another lie. The Great Hall was tense. Iron Peak warriors lined the walls, hands on their weapons, glaring at the small group of visitors huddled near the entrance. Rena walked in beside Vorian, her head high, though her legs felt like water. She wore her crown, a circlet of woven silver and iron. She needed the weight of it to remind herself who she was. And there they were. Lila stood in the center, wrapped in expensive white furs, looking every bit the tragic wronged princess. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her blue eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. But Rena didn't look at her stepsister. She looked at the woman standing behind her, a woman in a gray servant's cloak, looking thin, pale, and terrified. "Mom?" Rena whispered. The woman looked up. Her eyes were dull, broken. "Rena?" It was a trick. It had to be. Rena took a step forward, but Vorian's hand clamped onto her arm, holding her back. "Careful," he murmured. "Illusion magic is their specialty." Lila stepped forward, dropping into a graceful curtsy. "King Vorian," she said, her voice like wind chimes, "I have come to right a terrible wrong." She looked at Rena, and her expression shifted to one of pity and horror. "Oh, Rena, you poor sick thing." "Stop acting, Lila," Rena snapped, her voice echoing in the hall. "Why are you here?" Lila turned to Vorian, tears spilling dramatically onto her cheeks. "My lord, I must apologize for my sister. She is not well. She has suffered from delusions for years. She believes she is part of the family, but she is merely a servant girl we took in out of charity." Rena gasped. "Liar." "We tried to keep her contained," Lila continued, ignoring Rena. "But she stole my dowry. She stole the carriage meant for me. She ran away to play princess." Lila reached into her cloak and pulled out a scroll. "My father, Alpha Kale, demands you return the thief and the kidnapped boy immediately. And in exchange," she smiled, a dazzling, practiced smile, "I am here to fulfill the treaty. I am Lila, your true bride." The hall was silent. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Vorian didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked at Lila with those terrifying golden eyes. "You claim she is a servant?" Vorian asked softly. "A mad servant," Lila corrected. "She is dangerous, my lord. She kidnapped her own brother. Well, the boy she thinks is her brother. We kept her mother alive to try and control her, but she escaped." Rena looked at the woman in gray. "Mom, tell them. Tell them who I am." The woman flinched. She looked at Lila, then at Rena. Her lips trembled. "Please, Rena," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please just come home. Stop this game. You're hurting the family." Rena felt like she had been punched in the gut. Her mother was alive, but she was broken, brainwashed, or perhaps threatened. "You see?" Lila sighed. "It is tragic. But we can fix this. Hand her over, King Vorian. Let us take the poor girl to a healer in the south. And you and I?" She stepped closer to the dais, letting her fur cloak slip to reveal the low-cut gown beneath. "We can begin our union properly." Vorian finally moved. He descended the stairs, step by slow step. The sound of his boots was heavy, like a death knell. He walked past Lila without even looking at her. He walked straight to the woman in gray. He sniffed the air. "You smell of fear," Vorian said to Rena's mother. "And you smell of the dungeon." He turned to Lila. "You claim this woman is a servant?" "Yes," Lila said, looking confused. "Strange," Vorian said, "because my mate smells exactly like her." He moved back to Rena's side, wrapping an arm around her waist. "And my mate," he snarled, his voice rising to a roar that shook the dust from the rafters, "is the queen of the Iron Peaks. She carries my mark. She carries the bond." He pointed a finger at Lila. "You come into my home. You insult my wife. You parade her tortured mother in front of her like a bargaining chip." Vorian smiled, and it was the smile of the wolf before the kill. "You made a mistake coming here, Lila of the Silver River. You thought you were walking into a negotiation. The doors to the hall slammed shut, barred by Iron Peak guards. You walked into a trap." The sound of the heavy iron bars dropping across the doors echoed like a gunshot. Lila spun around, her white furs swirling, her perfect mask of tragedy slipping to reveal the ugly panic beneath. The Silver River guards who had accompanied her reached for their swords, but they were already dead men. Before steel could clear leather, 20 Iron Peak warriors had them at knife point. "You cannot do this!" Lila shrieked, her voice shrill and breaking. I am the daughter of an alpha. I have diplomatic immunity. Vorian descended the final step of the dais. He didn't rush. He moved with the inevitable, crushing momentum of a glacier. Immunity ends where treachery begins, he said calmly. He stopped 10 feet from Lila, but his eyes were on the woman in gray, Rena's mother. She was trembling so violently she could barely stand, her eyes darting between Lila and the floor, terrified to look at the daughter she had been told was dead or insane. Rena, Vorian said, his voice softening just a fraction. Go to her. Rena stepped forward. Her heart was pounding against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and fear. She approached the woman who had been the center of her world until 5 years ago, until Alpha Kale had locked her away. Mom? Rena whispered. The woman flinched. No, she mumbled, reciting lines like a broken doll. Rena is sick. Rena is confused. I am a servant. Look at me, Rena pleaded, reaching out to touch her mother's rough, work-worn hands. It's me. It's Rena. And Toby. Toby is here. He's safe. At the mention of Toby's name, something cracked in the woman's eyes, a spark of recognition warring with the fear. Toby! Stop it! Lila lunged forward, grabbing the woman's arm and digging her nails in. She is lying! Don't listen to her madness! A low growl vibrated through the room. It didn't come from Vorian. It came from Rena. For years, her wolf had been beaten into silence, starved of affection, cowed by fear. But seeing Lila touch her mother, seeing the cruelty that had destroyed their family, snapped the final chain. Rena's eyes flashed a brilliant, violent violet. Take your hands off her, Rena commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an alpha command, fueled by the bond she shared with Vorian. Lila gasped, snatching her hand back as if burned. She stared at Rena in shock. You have no authority. I am the queen of these mountains. Rena stepped closer, her voice rising, filling the hall. And you are standing on my stone, breathing my air, holding my mother hostage. Rena slapped Lila. It wasn't a graceful, courtly slap. It was a hit fueled by a lifetime of stolen food, cold cellars, and cruel whispers. The sound cracked through the hall. Lila stumbled back, clutching her cheek, blood welling at the corner of her lip. You little... Lila reached into her furs. Weapon! Harlan shouted from the side. Lila pulled out a dagger, not steel, but glass, a one-use enchantment blade, humming with unstable energy. She didn't aim it at Rena. She aimed it at Rena's mother. Let us go, Lila screamed, pressing the glass blade to the woman's throat. Let us go or I shatter this, and the spell will stop her heart instantly. Vorian went still. The golden fire in his eyes went out, replaced by a black, abyssal void of killing intent. If she dies, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, there is no hole deep enough, no mountain high enough to hide you from what I will do. I don't care. Lila was sobbing now, frantic. My father said you would bow. He said you were weak for the girl. Rena, Vorian said through the bond. Trust me. Rena looked at him. She saw the tension in his muscles, the way he was shifting his weight. He needed a distraction. 1 second. Rena looked at Lila. You were always jealous, she said loudly. Lila blinked, confused by the change of subject. What? You hated me, Rena continued, stepping forward, drawing Lila's gaze. Not because I was a stepdaughter, but because you knew, even without a title, even in rags, I was stronger than you. I was more wolf than you will ever be. Shut up, Lila shrieked, the knife wavering. And now, Rena smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile she had learned from Vorian. I am a queen, and you're just a bargaining chip that lost its value. Lila's rage spiked. For a split second, she turned the knife away from the mother's throat to point it at Rena. Now. Vorian moved. He didn't run. He blurred. He was a shadow, a strike of lightning. His hand clamped around Lila's wrist, crushing the bones with a sickening crunch. Lila screamed, dropping the glass dagger. Before it could hit the floor and shatter, Rena dove. She caught the blade inches from the stone, the dark magic humming against her palm. Vorian threw Lila backward. She skidded across the floor, crashing into the legs of his guards, who immediately pinned her down. Rena stood up, holding the dagger. She looked at it, then at her mother, who was sobbing, sinking to the floor. Rena threw the dagger into the fire. The glass shattered in the flames, releasing a plume of green smoke that vanished up the chimney. The spell broke. Rena's mother gasped, her back arching as the magical compulsion left her body. She looked up, her eyes clearing for the first time in 5 years. She looked at Rena, really looked at her. "Rena?" she whispered, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "My baby?" Rena fell to her knees and wrapped her arms around her mother. "I've got you!" she cried, burying her face in her mother's gray dress. "I've got you, Mom! We're safe!" Vorian stood over them, a silent sentinel, his chest heaving. He looked at Lila, who was weeping on the floor, defeated. "Get her out of my sight," he ordered the guards. "Put her in the ice cells. We will let Alpha Kale know his daughter is now a guest of the Iron Peaks. The ransom will be his surrender." The aftermath of the confrontation was a different kind of chaos, but it was a good chaos. Healers swarmed the Great Hall to attend to Rena's mother, whose name, Rena proudly told everyone, was Alara. Toby was brought down from the nursery, sleepy and confused until he saw his mother. The reunion broke the hearts of even the toughest Iron Peak warriors. Vorian stood back, watching from the shadows of a pillar. He let them have their moment. He was the king, the protector, but in this moment, he felt like an intruder on their grief and joy. He turned to leave, intending to go to the war room to draft the terms of Kale's surrender. "Vorian," he stopped. Rena was there. She had pulled away from her family for a moment. Her face was tear-streaked, her eyes puffy, but she had never looked more beautiful to him. "You're leaving?" she asked. "I have work," he said gruffly. "Your stepfather needs to be dealt with, and your mother needs space to heal." Rena walked up to him. She placed her hands on his chest, right over his heart. "They are my family," she said firmly, "but you are my mate. Do not think you can hide in your war room and pretend you aren't part of this." Vorian covered her hands with his own. "I am a monster, Rena. I solve problems with violence. I terrified that woman." "You saved her," Rena corrected. "You gave me my life back. Twice." She went up on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was soft, sweet, and full of a promise that shook him to his core. "Come meet my mother," she whispered against his lips, properly this time. Vorian hesitated, the great Alpha King looking unsure for the first time in his life, but he let her lead him back to the fire. Alara looked up as they approached. She was frail, her hair prematurely white, but her eyes were sharp, Rena's eyes. She looked at the giant man towering over her daughter. "So," Alara said, her voice raspy but strong, "you are the one who stole my daughter." Vorian bowed his head, a mark of respect he showed to no one. "I did not steal her, madam. I merely recognized that she was a queen long before she wore a crown." Alara studied him for a long moment. Then a small, weary smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing her." Winter eventually broke. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly the relentless gray gave way to patches of blue sky. The snow melted in the lower valleys, revealing hardy mountain wildflowers pushing through the frost. The war with the Silver River Pack never really happened. With Lila held captive and his trade routes blocked by the accidental rock slides Rena had suggested, Alpha Kale's support crumbled. His own pack, tired of his cruelty and the loss of trade, staged a coup before the snow even melted. Harlan, Vorian's beta, rode south to oversee the transition. They returned Lila, not as a prisoner, but as a disgraced exile. She would live, but she would never have power again. For Rena, life in the Iron Peaks settled into a rhythm of busy, fulfilling days. She worked with the healers, using the knowledge she'd gained from nursing horses and servants in the south. She sat on the council, her strategic mind earning her a place at Vorian's right hand, not just as a mate, but as a ruler. And Alara and Toby thrived. The mountain air, harsh as it was, seemed to scrub the shadow magic from their lungs. Toby grew inches in months, running with the other pack children, learning to hunt and howl, but the best moments were the quiet ones. 6 months after the confrontation, Rena stood on the highest balcony of the fortress. It was night, but the air was mild, carrying the scent of pine sap and thawing earth. Arms wrapped around her from behind, warm and heavy. Vorian. "You are thinking too loud," he murmured, biting gently at the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. "I can hear the gears turning." Rena leaned back into him, resting her hands over his where they clasped her waist. "I was just thinking," she said, looking out over the valley where lantern lights twinkled like fallen stars. "About the dress." "The wedding dress?" Vorian asked. "The one you burned?" "No." Rena laughed softly. "The one I arrived in. The one that was too thin, too fancy, too Lila." "I hated that dress," Vorian admitted. "It smelled of fear." "I was thinking." Rena turned in his arms to face him, looking up into his liquid gold eyes. "That we never had a real wedding. I mean, we did the vows. But it was tense." Vorian raised an eyebrow. "Tense? I seem to recall threatening to murder an elder if he didn't rewrite the ceremony." "Exactly," Rena grinned. "I want a do-over." Vorian stiffened slightly. "You want to undo the bond?" "No, you idiot wolf." She swatted his chest playfully. "I want a celebration, a real one, with music and food and dancing. And I want to wear a dress made of iron peak wool and silver fur. I want to marry you as Rena, not as a substitute, not as a political pawn. Just Rena." Vorian stared at her. The moonlight turned his skin to marble, his hair to ink. He looked overwhelming, intense, and completely, hopelessly in love. "Rena," he said, his voice rough, "you could ask me for the moon, and I would find a way to pull it down for you. A party is easy." He lifted her hand, kissing her ring finger where his mark, a tattoo of a mountain peak entwined with a river, now sat beneath her skin. "We will renew the vows," he said, "at the summer solstice, when the days are longest." "And Toby can be the ring bearer," Rena added, "and Mom can give me away." "Done," Vorian agreed, "on one condition." "What?" He pulled her hips flush against his. "That you promise me, right here, right now, that you will never again doubt where you belong." Rena looked past him, at the castle carved from stone, at the pack that had embraced her, at the family she had saved, and finally, at the man who had seen a queen when the world saw a servant. "I promise," she whispered. "I am Rena of the Iron Peaks, and I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Vorian smiled, a true, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. "Good. Now come inside, my queen. The wind is picking up, and I have many ideas on how to keep you warm." Epilogue. And 1 year later, the Summer Solstice Festival was the loudest thing the Iron Peaks had ever heard. Drums echoed off the canyon walls. Fiddles shrieked in happy harmony, and the smell of roasting boar filled the air. Rena sat at the high table, her feet aching from hours of dancing. Her mother sat to her left, laughing at something Harlan was saying. Toby was currently trying to wrestle a wolf pup in the center of the grassy courtyard, both of them covered in mud and grinning. Rena touched her stomach gently. It was flat still, but she knew. The healers had confirmed it that morning. A shadow fell over her. Vorian. He slid into the chair beside her, handing her a goblet of sparkling cider. "You look tired, wife." "Happy tired," Rena corrected. She took the cider. "It was a perfect day." "It was," Vorian agreed. He looked out over his people, their people. For the first time in generations, there were no guards on the walls watching for southern invaders. There was only peace. "Vorian?" Rena asked softly. He turned to her, his attention absolute. "Yes? Do you remember when you told me you wanted an heir? Someone to leave the mountain to?" Vorian's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the shift in her scent. "I said we had time. There is no rush, Rena." "I know," she smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. But apparently, the moon goddess had other plans. Vorian froze. His hand was large and warm against the silk of her dress. He stared at her stomach, then at her face, his eyes widening. "Are you—" His voice cracked. The terrifying Alpha King, conqueror of the North, looked like he might faint. "A pup?" "A pup," Rena confirmed. "Or maybe two." The healer wasn't sure. Vorian let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her hair, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the universe. "Thank you," he whispered into her skin. "Thank you." Rena held him, looking up at the stars above the mountain peaks. She thought about the girl in the carriage, shivering in a silk dress, terrified of the monster she was being sent to marry. She wished she could go back and tell that girl not to be afraid. She wished she could tell her that the monster was a king, that the prison was a castle, and that the end of her life was actually just the beginning. But she didn't need to go back. She was here. She was loved. And the story was far from over. End of story. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed The Substitute Bride. It's amazing to think that sometimes the things we fear the most turn out to be exactly what we need. If you loved Rena and Vorian's story, please leave a like and a comment. I read every single one, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I have a brand new story coming next week about a runaway princess and a dragon shifter that you definitely don't want to miss. See you then.